Welcome to the Section 508 Training Webinar Part 2, provided by the Transportation Research and Connectivity Pooled Fund. I'm Colleen Boss. I'm Research Program and Project Manager for CTC and Associates, and I have created Section 508 compliant reports and also remediated lots of other folks' reports. So I have some perspective I'm going to try to share as we go through this part 2 of a 2-part webinar providing Section 508 training. The recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint will be made available afterwards. The first webinar, which occurred 5 weeks ago, is already available on the Transportation Research and Connectivity website. My goal today is to delve further into Section 508 compliance, following up on your questions from the Adobe and Word training in Part 1. I'm also going to share an overview of accessibility in PowerPoint, and we should have time at the end for some live Q&A as well. As always, the goal is to help you produce deliverables that are accessible to all readers and are Section 508 compliant. But I want to take a moment also to thank Michael Molina and the members of the Transportation Research and Connectivity Pooled Fund. That includes Arizona, California, Idaho, Illinois, Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, New Jersey, New Mexico, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. All right, let me give you a little overview of what we're going to cover today. I want to review just a little bit from session 1, where to find the content, a summary of some key items, and top 10 tips for success. And also want to, again, take another look at some examples and best practices, this time in PowerPoint. We're going to review the webinar 1 follow-up questions. We're going to have time for some live Q&A, and then we're going to look at resources and where to go next. So 5 weeks ago, we had webinar 1. If you missed it, all the content from the previous webinar is available on the Transportation Research and Connectivity website. And maybe one of my colleagues from CTC would be kind enough to publish the URL in the chat just to make it easy for everyone to find the webinar that was recorded, as well as the PowerPoint that I used in that webinar. And just to summarize what did take place in that webinar, we reviewed goals for accessibility. We talked about the importance of starting with a good Word template and how to use the Word's built-in tools to create a document that's easy to read for everyone. We looked at converting Word to PDF and how there is kind of an iterative process where sometimes you'll find errors in PDF that you have to go back to the Word document to fix. Then you also have a few errors that you'll fix in PDF and how to know when you're done. So just to review some of the top takeaways from that before we dive into the rest of the content, here's my top 10. First of all, you want to do it right the first time so you don't have to remediate. Or as my boss put it, an ounce of doing it right the first time saves a pound of remediation after the fact. And the way you do that is by using a template and the built-in features of Word, which will help make it easy for assistive technology to work effectively, to have a clean, clear reading experience for your whole audience. You want to learn how to use them. And, this is a point I want to make a couple times today. Much of the success of this curriculum is built on the assumption that you can use Word and Adobe and PowerPoint effectively. And so making sure that you have good basic skills with that software is going to help you a lot with Section 508 compliance. Number 3 is looking at alt text, which is, of course, critical to accessible documents. You want to follow the 3 C's. You want to be concise. You aren't wasting anyone's time. But you want to include enough detail to be clear. And I recommend that you be considerate of context because you don't want to duplicate information over and over again. Number 4, even the most complex data can be put into a simple table with a single header, data in each cell, and no merged cells. Complex tables just don't work for accessibility, and we're going to touch on that a little bit more today because it came up in some of the follow-up questions. Number 5, equations are hard. I got a lot of questions about this as well. And what's frustrating is that the equation editor in Word doesn't produce an equation that is accessible. So for any but the simplest equations, you end up having to take a screenshot and provide alt text for it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well. Most of your Adobe errors are going to be fixed in Word, and the rest that are fixed in Adobe get pretty nitpicky. So you want to know where the resources are for how to fix things in Adobe and use those references as you go through them, rather than just, trying to delve into, tag and content panels and things like that on your own without guidance. Number 7, you want to be able to check your color contrast, and we went over some good tools for checking that last time. Number 8, oops, got ahead of myself. Number 8, you want to check your reading order, and there are tools that make this easy too, and we'll also talk a little bit more about it today because that also came up in your follow-up questions. Number 9 is that you can test drive your work with read aloud or other reader options. There are not only is the read aloud feature in Word a useful resource, but there's also free downloads available of assistive reader technology that more exactly match what an unsighted person might use if you really want to check and see if your remediated document is going to give the end user a good experience. And number 10, don't go it alone. You are not alone. Everyone struggles with this stuff. And that's why we're putting all these good resources available on the LibGuide website so that you have some materials available to help you with all of this. So with that, let's delve into PowerPoint a little bit. Last time we spent all of our focus on Word and Adobe, but PowerPoint is often a required deliverable for research as well. And I'm not going to go too deep, but I thought we could cover some of the most common errors and issues in Microsoft PowerPoint and how to address them. Much like Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint has its own built-in accessibility checker. And like Word, the most recent version will even make some helpful suggestions here and there. So I'm going to show you how to find and use the accessibility checker, and we're going to review some of the common errors that it catches and how to address them. Now, don't worry if it seems like this information in this first slide goes by fast. We'll talk about each of these in more detail as we go through PowerPoint accessibility. But first things first, let's take a little tour of how it works. So you're going to go up to Review on your toolbar and go over and find the Check Accessibility button. And you'll see that that nice accessibility panel pops up on the right-hand side to guide you through your errors. Now, the first one is going to be somewhat familiar because it's missing alt text. And you're going to click on that, and it's going to bring up the alt text dialog box, the alt text panel, I guess is what it would be called, so that you can add your alt text for this particular visual. In this case, it's this video that we're looking at. So we're adding the alt text for that there. And when we're done, we'll see that that error has been cleared out of the accessibility checker. So that's gone. Now it's talking about a missing slide title. Sure enough, I had not designated a title on this slide, but it sees that this looks like the title and suggests that we set it as a slide title. And I accept that suggestion. Now we go into the warnings. In this case, it sees that we have a video and it wants to make sure that since that video has some audio, that it is captioned. And I did put captions on this video, but it's good to visually verify that they come through, and there it is. So we can set aside that particular warning. The next one that comes up is reading order. So we're going to verify the reading order. You click on that and it brings up the reading order dialog box, which we'll look at a little bit further later, but it's real easy to just drag and drop things and get the order that you want for reading order established on that slide. And that's something that you can verify on any slide. And then finally, it flags the fact that we have a duplicate slide title. So we're going to go in and fix that. It is considered a best practice for PowerPoint to have a unique title for each slide. It just makes navigation a little bit easier. So that's how that works. Let's talk a little bit more about the common errors. A couple of these common errors are related, and that's a missing slide title and a duplicate slide title. These cause problems because the slide titles are a key way that assistive technology and also most readers of all kinds navigate your PowerPoint. So having titles and not using the same title over and over again is important to help people find information in your presentation. Next one on the list is alt text or alternative text, which is just as important in PowerPoint as it is in Word or Adobe. If you use images to make a point in your PowerPoint, you're going to want to describe that point and make sure that that comes across to the reader. If you don't have anything in the alt text at all, then the accessibility checker will flag it for you, but you also want to make sure it's good text, a good description. And finally, reading order is another issue that's easy to check in PowerPoint, as you hopefully just saw, and we'll take a look at that further as well. But much of the rest of the art of making an accessible PowerPoint is just creating a presentation that's easy to read and follow for all audiences. So part of what I'm showing you in the next few slides is simply following good design practice. So let's talk about the basics, design and layout. You want to use a simple, uncluttered layout. You want to choose a font that's easy to read. For example, avoid using script fonts. You want to limit the amount of detail on each slide, and often using bullet points or lists is a good way to get information across concisely. You want to avoid patterned backgrounds or low color contrasts that just make your slide, busy and hard to read. And you don't want to use any flashing images. That's inaccessible because it can trigger seizures in some people. For that reason, you'll see that I did not include any examples of flashing images, but it is something to avoid. Anyway, there's no real trick here. We're just following, again, good design practice. And what's going to be helpful to a low vision reader or someone who's using assistive reader technology is probably going to be helpful to all of your readers. So here's I try to model good behavior. We all do here at CTC. So I'm holding this particular slide up as an example of a good accessible layout. It's an easy to read font. I used bullet points. I tried to be concise. There's good color contrast, all those things. So now let's take a look at what an inaccessible version might look like. And here you go. It's not dramatic, but we're using a much lighter font that's harder to distinguish from the background. We aren't using any bullet points. We used a font that has some serifs, which makes it just a little bit harder for your eyes to read. And it's just going to be a little bigger challenge. It's harder even for someone with no vision issues whatsoever to focus on what the important information is there. So one of the keys is when in doubt, use a template. PowerPoint has a number of templates that will make it easy for you to design a clean, clear, easy to read slide deck. But also, chances are your agency or organization may have a template that they prefer that has been vetted for Section 508 compliance. And I'd encourage you to seek it out. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good resources out there. So let's talk a little bit more about slide titles. Slide titles are a lot like headings in a Word document. As you saw in our test of the accessibility checker, each slide will ideally have a unique title. This helps all readers navigate the PowerPoint. Imagine, if you will, how maddening it would be. And again, if you're fully sighted, imagine how frustrating it would be if you've got a 100-slide PowerPoint and you're trying to find that one slide that had that really great piece of information, but every slide has basically the same title. It would be really hard to navigate. So for lots of reasons, you want to have unique slide titles. And even if you have 2 slides worth of information on one related topic, it's pretty easy to say issue 1 and then, issue 1 continued. Or if you have 5 slides on a pavement density test, it can be density test 1, density test 2, density test 3. Whatever helps make a meaningful difference to your audience so that they can keep track of those things. And you want to be able to check your reading order. You want to make sure that each PowerPoint slide has a logical reading order, starting with title and then adding content, tables, images in the order that you prefer. So let's take a look at how that works. In order to check the reading order, you want to go to Home, and then you're going to go over to Arrange. and pull up the selection pane. And over there, again, like you saw before, we can drag and drop those items into any order that we want them to be. In this case, everything is in the correct order. But here's the tricky part. I don't know if you noticed this, but slide the title 1 is at the very bottom of this list. And the second item is in the middle, and the last item that's going to get read is at the top. For whatever reason, I don't know why, the selection pane organizes things in the opposite order of how it's going to be read on the screen. And I know that's confusing. Just file it away in the back of your head. You want the title to be at the bottom and everything else to follow. So that is the one trick to reading order. Other than that, it's very easy to work with in PowerPoint. Another trick to using PowerPoint correctly and making sure that an assistive reader technology can work with it effectively is making sure that you're actually using the tools within PowerPoint, like a bulleted list, in order to create a bulleted list. You can easily use like an asterisk in the space bar or something like that to manually create a list that's going to look like a bulleted list. You can also manually number a list and get the visual effect that looks like a numbered list, but looking right and reading right are not the same thing. And if you aren't using the actual list feature in PowerPoint, it's not going to be read properly by assistive technology. But there's an easy way to check to see that what looks like a bulleted list is actually a bulleted list. And I can imagine this might be especially important if you're collaborating on a slide deck with a colleague. You want to verify that everything has been formatted correctly. So it's very simple. You're just going to go up to Home, and you just slide over to the middle of that ribbon and look, and sure enough, the bullet points are highlighted, and that means that is actually a proper bulleted list. And the same thing applies to columns. You can certainly use tabs and spaces to create the appearance of columns. You can achieve the visual effect that you want, but none of these things are going to be read properly by assistive technology. But much like the lists, the columns are very easy to check. You go up to Home, you go over to the column button, and you see that one column has been highlighted. You could switch it to 2 or 3, not quite enough content for 3, so we'll go back to 2. But now you know that you're properly using a formatted set of columns, and it will be read the way you want it to be read by assistive technology. Another area to look out for is tables. You can use the features of PowerPoint to create a table if you need to use one. And you might be tempted in this visual meeting just to put in a picture of a table or something like that, but the reader isn't going to read that data. So unless you type all of that data into alt text, which seems pretty cumbersome, it's a lot easier just to use a real table. And we went over simple versus complex tables last time. The main thing is that complex tables, ones that have merged cells or multiple levels of headers, won't be accessible in PowerPoint. So you don't want to use them. And again, you just want to use the features of PowerPoint to put a simple table in, like this. You will go up to Insert, you will click on Table, you will figure out how many rows and columns you want, and then you're going to insert that table, and you're going to make sure that there's headings all the way across and that there's data in every single cell, and that is going to read perfectly. I didn't fill in all the data there. You want to make sure that you do have information in every cell and that every header row has a heading there as well. But let's jump into the next one, which is alt text. And we spent much more time on alt text in webinar 1 than I am today. But the same rules apply to PowerPoint as to Word or Adobe. So if you missed webinar 1, I really encourage you to review the information on alt text. And I also want to say that I do appreciate that PowerPoint is in many ways a visual medium, but the world really uses it to communicate, and you need to make sure that critical communications are not lost to a certain segment of your audience. So when you use an image in PowerPoint, you need to assess if it's merely decorative or if you included it for a specific purpose. And if it's the latter, you need to describe what it's doing in the slide. When you're writing alt text, Think about the purpose of the image and not just what it looks like. You do want to describe what it looks like, but you want to make sure that you're including the purpose there as well. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint hot tips from webinar 1, which is consider the visual's contribution. Write enough, but not too much. When in doubt, you can always choose to be literal and describe what you see. Include logos. Those are important sources of information, often about funding or support. Include icons. Sometimes, for example, a social media icon is a call to action. So you want to make sure you include that and you describe that in the alt text. You want to avoid repetition. You want to think about the caption and other information surrounding the image and make sure that you aren't just repeating yourself. And finally, you want to use good grammar and punctuation, just like you would for anything. So we'll take a look quickly at how to put alt text into a PowerPoint. We had already looked at how it gets flagged with the accessibility checker and you can fix it, but this is looking at how to fix it on the fly. So you're going to right click on that image. You're going to choose view alt text. It's going to pull up that alt text panel. You're going to add your alt text and it's as simple as that. And I'm specifically showing you how this works as a work in progress instead of waiting for the accessibility checker at the end, because it's really a lot easier to write alt text as you go rather than waiting to the end when you've maybe got, 10 or 12 things you've got to fix. You're right in the moment right now. You know why you selected that image. Go ahead and put that alt text in there as you're working. And then this being a multimedia kind of format, I figured I should just touch on if you include audio files, you want to make sure that you include a transcript in the alt text. If you include video files, you want to make sure that you include a thorough description. And if you're using multimedia files, you want to make sure you have synchronized captions and that you also have a description of what's in the video. So a few things to consider as you're using different types of multimedia files in your PowerPoint. Hyperlinks. Same rules apply as Word and Adobe. For assistive technology, in order to correctly identify a hyperlink, you need to handle them the right way and use the hyperlink feature. It's also a best practice to ensure that the context surrounding the link or the link name adequately describes one of the following: the destination, the function, and the purpose. Hyperlinks need to describe what you're accessing and use something other than color to convey that it's a hyperlink, such as underlining. So here's a few examples that are not accessible and one that is accessible. And I think you can see the last one is both a nice visual cue and also works well when it's read aloud. It tells you what it is and why to go there. So the inaccessible link doesn't use the hyperlink feature and it's not underlined, and it would just be real easy for someone to miss or misunderstand, and you can't just directly click into it. The second one is actually a proper hyperlink, and you can just click into it, but it doesn't give you a lot of information. It just says link here. The last one is the ideal. It says read the article on guidelines for preparing 508 compliant research reports, and it is actually a proper link that you could click into if you wanted to. So that's the goal with hyperlinks. Next, we want to look at watermarks and headers and footers. This is also an issue that applies to Word that we really didn't discuss in webinar 1, but let's talk about it now. Headers, footers, and watermarks. Screen readers can't read the information in those items. To make this content accessible, it needs to be added to the presentation somewhere. For example, if you have a date stamp in the footer, but you have it on the main text of your opening slide, like with this presentation, then it probably doesn't matter that the information is not being repeated out loud. However, because it was presented up front, however, if you're presenting materials that you feel are proprietary and confidential, and you have that information in a footer or a watermark, like the example on the left side of your screen, that's indicating confidentiality, you're going to want to move that information from the watermark into a statement of confidentiality on the text of the slide, especially if it critically needs it, so that that actually gets read aloud via a screen reader. So on the left, you can see we have it as a watermark that'll get skipped over, and on the right, the accessible version has that information on the slide itself. And finally, we want to take a look at file names. This is another issue that applies to Word and Adobe as well, by the way. You want to create a file name that provides enough description to identify the document or its purpose. For example, the file name for the webinar that I'm presenting right now is Transportation Research and Connectivity, Section 508 Training, Webinar 2. It tells you exactly what it is. You also want to make sure that they're using the .pptx ending. If it's just .ppt, it is not going to work with an assistive reader technology. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that little difference. And with that, that's a good overview of PowerPoint, and we'll have time at the end for questions. But let's get into following up on the questions from webinar 1. We received lots of questions and follow-ups as a result of webinar 1. I responded to everybody directly, I think. I hope I didn't miss anyone. If I did, please don't be afraid to follow up with me. But I want to review the topics that people asked about here, because I believe that if one person had the question, then other folks will have the question as well. And the first question up is a very important one. Why does the technical report documentation page of our final report always trigger errors for table headers and table regularity in Adobe? And you guys probably all recognize this page. It's a required page that we all have to include, and it triggers an error consistently. And the reason for that error, if you look at this, is because of merged cells. You can see there's merged cells here and all over the place. And PDF doesn't like it. It's going to trigger this error every time. It's a known error. Rosa P. and Trid and others are aware, so they will not reject reports that have that one specific error as a result of the technical report documentation page. But it sure is confounding if you don't know that you're trying to remediate a document properly. All right, let's go on to question 2. This is about table regularity as well, slightly different question. I've noticed that here's the full question. I've noticed we have an issue with the tables that nearly always result in errors with table regularity. They're marked as tables, but it's like each box is marked as separate, sometimes resulting in over 100 elements. The only thing I've really found that truly fixes it is auto tagging the document, which doesn't always work. And sometimes it just breaks something else. Auto tagging means I totally have to redo my alt text, but it's easier than having to try to work my way through each and every table. I'm feeling this person's pain. So let's take a look at these tables together. And by the way, I do specifically want to say that I have permission from the person who submitted this question to use their materials for this training today. And there are a couple other examples that come up later, and I did get permission from everyone in order to include those materials. But let's take a look at this one. So I ran the checker on this, and you can see there's a whole bunch of errors under table regularity. So for first one, you can see that there are merged cells up here, and that is why that's causing an error. And over here, merged cells at the bottom, that's what's triggering the table regularity error. And more merged cells at the bottom, and more merged cells up at the top, and then also over on the left-hand side. So I'm not going to go through every one of the dozens of errors that were there, but the answer, the key here is that you've got merged cells there. And the only way to fix that is actually going to be to go back to the Word document. And actually, let's take a look at this for a second. It's easier than you might think to remediate this. This is a complex table, but you can split these cells right here, split them back up, and they've been merged. You're going to split them back up into 5 different cells, and you're just going to include that column header on every single one. And you can do other kinds of fixes too. Like you probably don't need this top row. You could move most of this information down into the second row, and then you're very quickly going to have a document with no merged cells and data in each cell. And that, when you convert it to PDF, will fix the problem. But you really have to go back to Word. There's not a good way to do that in PDF. Question 3. Reading order for figures and captions. I've been setting my orders such that the caption always goes first, if possible, and the figure second. The caption introduces the figure, and then the figure's alt text helps provide elaboration. Does there exist a definitive best practice for this, or is it up to the remediator? Well, I want to note that it is up to the simple answer is it's up to the remediator to decide the best flow. But I want to say I like what this person is trying to do, the idea of having the caption go first, but depending on the full context of the document, that might not always be the right choice. And just in general, I have a feeling that if you convert like a 200-page research report and the default is that it's going to read the alt text before the caption, I think you've got to think about whether it's really worth your time to correct that dozens and dozens of time, because the person who's getting that information through a reader is still going to get the information they need. And it really is sort of a question of the context of your document, what order you want things in. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is it is up to the remediator to decide the best flow. You do what you want to do. I just want to look at a reading order example here where a couple things. I want to show you how reading order works. Click on that little zigzaggy tool on the right, and now you can verify what order the information on the page is going to be read in. In this case, there was a heading in addition to the image itself and the caption, and I had it set to read that heading first, and then the image itself, and then the caption. So that was my decision about what the best flow is. You've got to look each person at your own document and figure out what makes the most sense for your context. So it really is up to you. Another reading order question. What is the best way to set the proper reading order? I look at tags, order, and content panels in Adobe. Is one better than the other? Well, I'm going to preface this by saying this is a very good question. Tags and content do actually impact the way that reading order goes. But in the end, it's really the reading order panel that's kind of the final word, the place to check for reading order and correct reading order, and it will have the final word on what the reading order is. So let's take a look at how that works. Once again, we are going to go over here to the reading order tab, and we're going to take a look at what order this document is in. And I'm overall pretty satisfied with what order things are going to get sent, read in. I'm maybe just going to move that date to come after the image. So I just reorganized that a little bit. I can take a look at tags to just kind of verify that everything looks reasonable to me. I can go into the content panel and see that things look reasonable there. But in the end, it's going to be that reading order panel that gives you the final answer on how things are going to be read. All right. Next question, character encoding. Can you help me with these character encoding issues? Please see attached. Word shows no issues, but PDF does, and we are using Word's equation editor. And by the way, I want to just say I do have permission to share this example as well. So let's take a look at this one. This is the document that I was sent. And unfortunately, the answer is pretty straightforward. Word's equation editor doesn't actually create accessible equations. So we go in, we go to page content to take a look at the character encoding issues, and we'll take a look at all four of them. And sure enough, the first one is the equation editor that's causing the problem. Second one, the third one, and the fourth one. Each time, this is Word's equation editor not creating an accessible equation. And unfortunately, this is frustrating, but the only fix is to go in and actually take a screenshot of the equation that you want to include and then write alt text that very carefully explains what that equation is telling you. So it's frustrating. I really hope Microsoft fixes this problem soon because it's definitely, I would say, up there in one of the most frustrating aspects for everyone working on Section 508 compliance. All right, we got a question about what is the difference between the read aloud function and an actual screen reader when checking reading order? And the answer is assistive technology or screen readers are much more robust than the read aloud features in Word or Adobe. They're reading, the actual screen readers are reading metadata and tags, provide a nuanced and detailed read to end users. The read aloud function doesn't have access to that metadata. It's a good gut check. I really encourage people to give it a try, but you could also just go download a real assistive reader, and there are a number of free ones available. If you go to the American Foundation for the Blind's webpage, they have a section on screen readers, a whole big long list that are available, and many of them are free downloads. And possibly one of my nice colleagues from CTC would put that URL in the chat as well. Question 7. If we need to show documentation of meeting accessibility standards, what's the best way to do that? Well, one way would be to export the accessibility report from Adobe Acrobat, which would indicate that the document had passed all the requirements, assuming you fully remediated. But it would still be up to the agency you're working with to determine if that standard works for them, if that's what they consider accessible or Section 508 compliant. But just in case that is something that would be useful, I want to show you how to do it. So when you are running an accessibility report, you go over to check accessibility. You want to verify that you know what folder that is going to save your accessibility report into. It's automatically going to save it. So you run the report, you verify that it's a clean report other than the two items that always come up as needing a manual check. And then you go to where that was saved, and you can pull up this accessibility report, which shows that you have passed in all these areas. So that is something that then you could, print out or turn into a PDF and share with your client to say, look, we passed all the PDF accessibility checks. All right, training.
Well, before you move on, Colleen, just
Yeah.
I'll weigh in and comment on that. Hi, everyone. This is Brian Hurt with CTC and Associates, one of Colleen's colleagues. That last one went by quickly. Just a quick note that that accessibility report is actually output as an HTML file, which you may or may not be used to using other than as just when you're on the web using a browser. So that would require pulling it up using Chrome or another browser and then exporting it to PDF and sharing it that way. So just that's kind of a power user tool, but it can be very convenient. So just wanted to make that clarification. Thanks, Colleen. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that was a good clarification, Brian. I jumped into that browser pretty quickly, so that's helpful. Question 8 is on training. Do you have a recommendation for introducing Section 508 compliance best practices to staff? Where do we start? How do we introduce them and then add to the complexity with time? Well, I want to point you to the LibGuide, which has a lot of training resources on it. It has the Accessible Electronic Document Community of Practice series of training videos. They're all very short, like 3 to 10 minutes, very nice bite-sized chunks. They are starting to get just a little bit outdated because the versions of Word or PowerPoint that they're using are just a couple versions back, but they're an excellent grounding in the basics, and they're just really nice little chunks of information. The Section 508.gov is also linked to the LibGuide and has additional training resources. But also, I would recommend Webinar 1, which we put on 5 weeks ago. There's a lot of information there, but you could have them watch 10 or 15-minute chunks at a time to get an introduction to the concepts. And finally, I would recommend a good Word, Adobe, and PowerPoint training as a great foundation to help someone be able to be successful using the features of software once they understand the basic concepts of Section 508 accessibility. I feel like those things go hand in hand. We have a question here about PowerPoint to PDF issues. Let's say we have a PowerPoint file, and we know when we export it to a PDF, certain items, images, and tables are going to flag issues that need adjusting. Is keeping the file a PowerPoint accessible? So I'm going to answer this one carefully. Technically, if your client allows it, you could just give them the PowerPoint if that appears to be accessible. But my guess is that if you're having an issue, especially with images and tables in PDF, you've also probably got an accessibility issue in that PowerPoint, and you should really do your best to get to the bottom of it and resolve it. Question 10. You guys really threw all kinds of great stuff at me. What is your recommendation on generating alternative text for a role plot? So we're going to take a look at the example that I was sent. This is a role plot, and right beside it is my alt text for this role plot. This is a role plot of two sections of highway that meet at a T intersection. I probably could have included that this is a satellite map. The legend describes the following, and then I go through and I describe everything that's included, all the text included in this legend, because that's all really important. It's basically giving them the keys to what's going on in this role plot. And then finally, I end by letting them know that there's a compass and there's a scale of 1 to 100 inches. So for those who aren't familiar, by the way, a role plot is basically a map with detailed information laid over it. So I created that description without any information about the context of this image. I didn't have the report that it was a part of. I would guess that there would probably be a caption that might include other information, such as dates and locations and things like that. If those things weren't included in a caption, I would probably add them to the description. But this description, as it is, allows a person without sight to understand what kind of information is available in the role plot and likely allows them to get enough information to determine whether this role plot is relevant to their job role or not. And that's really the goal. Oops, I think I skipped one. Yes, time for remediation. In order to help our project team meet milestones and schedules, what is an average time frame for document remediation? We've heard about an hour a page. Well, if you're using best practices and writing a document in Word that you intend to be accessible, it should make the time required to remediate it at the end pretty minimal. Even without that, an hour a page sounds high to me. I've seen 250-page reports that were well put together in the first place that could be remediated in 15 minutes. And I've seen 70-page documents that took 25 hours. But either way, an hour a page is probably too high.
And I'll expand on that just a little bit, Colleen.
Go for it.
I think it's a really good practice to have someone who you're asking to give an estimate take a look at the document in need of remediation. And that's something that we commonly do because it can vary so much. And a quick look usually is if the person you're asking knows what they're doing, can take a look and say, yep, that's easy, that's involved, that's intractable, whatever it is. I mean, it wouldn't take an answer without having someone look at your item or items specifically first, because you just can't make an informed answer without taking a look at what the problem is.
Very good. All right. Question 12 is about third-party checkers. Do you use any third-party accessibility checkers in addition to the internal software checker? And the answer is, I have not personally, but I did check around with some of my CTC colleagues, and they have used third-party checkers and say that they can be quite useful. But I want to go back to the fact that I have never used a third-party checker because you can achieve Section 508 accessible documents without buying extra software. And they might be really helpful. It might make it easier. That time savings might be worth it to you, but it's not something that you really need to have, in my experience. Question 13. Do you know if other DOTs require their final reports to be submitted as a Word document or as a PDF? Well, we recommend both, and most of our clients require both. As a client, you should be able to require the formats that you need for your organization. As a state DOT, since you need to be sure of Section 508 compliance, it's extremely helpful to have access to the Word file in case you do need to tweak something. So it should be perfectly reasonable for you to ask for both formats. And with that, we come to the end of our questions. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the next steps that we're going to take, and then we're going to go ahead and get into some live Q&A. So next steps, we will put the recorded webinar from today up on the Transportation Research and Connectivity LibGuide site. And we will also put my PowerPoint up there. And in general, we're trying to take another look at that page. We're going to be working on a little redesign and coming up with more resources, more tools, more things to help you through Section 508 compliance. So with that, I think we can get to some questions. And let's see, I don't know if we have some in the chat. I will take a look there. All right, going all the way back up to the top. And I see that my helpful colleagues have given you things. Yes.
I don't believe we do have any that have built up in the
Oh,
chat,
great.
so we can just open it to folks want to raise their hands. We can unmute them if they wish to type it in the chat box. That works too. I'll answer this question from Deborah regarding LaTeX, and that is a layout language used more, I would say, by scientists and mathematicians. It is fabulous for what it does. In fact, if you use a lot of equations, it wouldn't surprise me if you're using TeX in some form or other rather than equation editor. The really nice thing about it is it outputs to vector graphics much more easily than I think Word's equation editor does. I don't think it gets you around the fact that you still need to output to an image and add alt text to it when you insert it into your Word file. I could be wrong about that, but I think TeX is open source and there are different versions of it, so there may be one floating around there. I have one of our colleagues uses TeX for the very complicated equations when we're writing reports, and it's great, but it ultimately doesn't solve the problem of a native equation in Word that will have alt text.
All right, we have
I'll let you continue on there.
All right, we have a question from David. He says, does that mean that 508 compliant Word template will be redone on the LibGuide website, or is the 2023 version still good to use? The 2023 version is still good to use. We will always be taking a look at the tools that are there and updating them as time goes by, but the 2023 version of that template is still a good resource and up to date.
And to then clarify, really what we're going to be doing as we look at that page is starting with probably the next section of items all the way to the end, doing a really careful look in terms of what resources are on the page, if they belong there, if they can be updated, and then reorganizing them a little bit just so this whole page is a little bit more user-friendly, more organized, and provides a little bit more scaffolding so someone who's trying to use these resources knows where to go.
Yes. Next question. I have issues with making images inline in Word and not being able to put them back where they belong. Any ideas? Well, I'm going to give you a multi-part answer to this. The first part is, man, I feel your pain. I have occasionally had some real playing around to do, trying to make an inline image go where I wanted it to go. And it's usually a mixture of, using the justification or, playing around with what some of the formatting is around the context of that image. But the other thing that I want to say, besides, yeah, it can be a little bit frustrating, but there is usually a way to do it, is that this is one of the places where I actually think having that extra level of grounding in Word and PowerPoint and other software can be helpful. In terms of, I don't think you have to be a super user, but it does help if you know what all those little toggle switches are that allow you to play around with the formatting and positioning of an image. So I'm going to use this as just an opportunity to say again that don't be afraid if you're wrestling with Section 508 issues to also just go back and get a little remedial, detailed Word and PowerPoint and Adobe training if you have access to it, because I think it will help you in problem solving some of these issues and in making sure that you're using the tools and formatting techniques correctly. Anything you want to add there, Brian?
Yes, thank you, Colleen. I'll add a couple maybe specific tips specifically if you might find helpful. Often when you make text inline, it may have been in front of or behind, more likely in front of your text. And in order to make it work, there were a whole bunch of character turns or blank spaces. And so when you change that text to inline, you still have all those spaces that now really need to be deleted. You might consider copying your image and pasting it into a blank Word file, just as a temporary place to put it, and then cleaning up your image, or your Word file that you have, kind of get rid of all the extra spaces and kind of make it just ready to drop your file in, and then pasting it in and see if that helps. Another issue you're going to have is you may have an image that's wider than your margins, which is fine when it's behind or in front of text, but when you put it in line, it's always going to align with your left margin. So you might try resizing that image once you've made it inline, because you may need to just be narrower, because an image that's, if you have 6-inch or 6.5-inch margins and you have a 7-inch wide image, it's going to just overset to the right way too far once you change its formatting. So again, just if that's helpful, if you have experience with Word, you might just think about that as a way. And as with all things, if you're having a problem, others have had that problem. Even just searching the web for guidance, you may find a dozen YouTube videos of people who address that. So as Colleen says, you are not alone, but that doesn't make you have any less of a problem, but hopefully that gets you on the road.
We have time for more questions if anybody's got one. Well, not seeing any questions coming up and not seeing hands raised, I think I can probably give you all about 9 minutes of your day back. We can go ahead and wrap this up. I also really want to encourage you, if you have questions after the fact, if you think, oh man, I wish I'd asked Colleen that, go ahead and contact me. That we're here to help. So send us your questions, and that may help inform us with what kinds of tools and resources we look to add to the LibGuide as well. So thank you, everyone, very much for your time today. Oh, we did get one last comment. Images not in line can be fixed in PDF version. I've never done that. I cannot verify anything about that, but that is a tip that was offered up in the comments. Oh, Brian, you're muted.
Thank you. I believe it's right, and it can be, but of course, then you have to fix it every time you re-output. It's one of those types of errors that it's probably better fixed in Word, but our Evans is correct. So, all right. Again,
Awesome.
thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.